We had been at Bowdoin for a long time, my husband and I, and somewhere in the vicinity of December 1979, there was a problem with air quality in the chemistry department, which was then Cleveland Hall. And the problem was that the odors were giving students headaches and complaining about the smell.
Well, I think that I had fallen into the mold of assuming that we were going to have the ventilation system reworked in the building because the organic lab was really not good. It was a bit over $250,000 to revamp just this one lab, and that forced me to begin to think a little bit more about what was going to happen when he said, "Is there another way you can do the lab to make it less expensive?" And my instant response was, "No, it's the way it's been done for a long time, and we can't change it." I woke up in the middle of the night, and the idea popped into my mind.
All of a sudden, I got this real tap on the shoulder, which was not a little tap. It was like, "Wow, wake up, Chick. Guess what? I think I have this idea."
You know, if we could miniaturize it, if we could do microscale experiments, or miniaturized, to reduce the size of it, that would solve several problems. You'd solve the environmental problem, but then again, you get a bonus because you could save enormous amount in the operational costs of the laboratory. And at that point, I didn't realize it, but you were going to be much more efficient at teaching the subject, and on and on. There were things that I just never dreamed were going to happen. The next day, I went into Baron Pike, who was in, and I said, "Pike, what do you think about this?" Now, if he had said, "Not a chance in the world, that's really off the wall, forget it," I think that would have been the end of it. But he didn't. He bid on it. He said, "Gee, that's interesting. I hadn't really thought about that. Maybe that could work." So I thought to myself, boy, people are really listening to what I'm saying. Maybe something is really good here.
The administration at that point was Al Fuchs and Roy Greason. And after much discussion, say, "Would you be willing to front me $25,000 and maybe we could come up with another way to do this laboratory?"
Scientific glassware is made by small companies because it can't be made by machines. It's too complicated for machine making. And so small companies still are in business. And in Vineland, New Jersey, there's this collection of these small companies which make most of the scientific glassware for the U.S. And when we were first developing this stuff at Bowdoin, the salesman from Ace Glass, which was one of these companies in Vineland, would come by the office a lot, and he got interested in what we were doing, and he said, "I think we can help you out."
Because they were changing from using huge flasks to actually creating new glassware and designing new glassware, and experiments that were taking 2 or 3 hours, or you'd go to your lab and it was a 4-hour lab and you could do one experiment, and if it didn't work, you had to find in your schedule another whole afternoon. Whereas what they were suggesting was to reduce everything down so that your product was 1 or 2 drops.
The impact was so large. Of course, when we started, we were approached by by John Wiley to publish this as a text, because the question was, you got to get it out. And so we were putting this text together, and the rumor got out that we were putting a text together. And so all of a sudden, the demand was so great that Wiley pushed us to just send them the manuscript. They wanted to publish the manuscript as it was, with all its errors and punctuation, all the problems of this. And indeed, it was. They sold over 700 copies of that preliminary version, which you see in there, that massive.
I didn't think of it as an experiment. I thought of it as an incredibly exciting pursuit for Dana. Also at the college at that time was a longtime friend, Ron Pike, who was here from Merrimack College, and he was spending his sabbatic year here. they could not look at each other without talking about this. I mean, it's all that his wife and I ever heard when we worked together. It totally consumed them.
I was so pessimistic that the first week in the spring semester, I never went down to the lab when they were doing it. I just couldn't bring myself to do it. And eventually, towards the end of that week, Caroline came in and said, "Professor Mayo, don't you want to come down and see what's going on in the lab?" And I said, "Well, okay, Caroline, I'll come down." And of course, I was stunned when I walked in the lab. Big change. Number one, the lab was absolutely quiet. There was no chit-chat among people because everybody was so busy doing the chemistry, they didn't have time to chit-chat. You know, if you got, a quart of material you're going to bring up to a temperature to boil, it takes 10 or 15, 20 minutes. If you have a few drops to bring up the temperature, it's a second or two. So you never have any time time to spend chit-chatting with your neighbor. Everything's going on at a very rapid clip, and you've got to be right there with it. I heard a comment by one student when he was saying, "Oh, shoot, I blew it." Now, that would have meant in the past that he would come back on Friday afternoon for a makeup lab because he didn't get his lab done correctly the first time around. Whereas now, he had so much time on his hands to repeat, he could easily try it a half a dozen times in one afternoon. And if he didn't get it then he had to come back. But in fact, he had plenty of time to get it done. So it was success. So everybody left the lab now not frustrated, even though they had it. And more than that, by repeating it until you got it, you picked up the technique quicker. So it really made a huge difference in how it was working. We published that preliminary edition in '85, and then the main text came out, the first edition came out in '86. And then the second edition was published in '91, and the third edition was published in '95. And then the changes were becoming fewer, and we were getting it pretty well honed down. But so it went from 2005 to 2010 before the fifth edition came out.